We're here in the upstate of South Carolina on a rather chilly early spring day, and we're speaking with Freeman Owle, a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in Cherokee, North Carolina. Freeman, I want to speak with you a little bit today about Cherokee Americans and the tribe, but first I want to touch base with Cherokees in South Carolina. As you know, Cherokee people used to inhabit this area quite a bit, but due to pressure from migration in the mid to late 1700s, they were fairly removed from South Carolina, but they now inhabit North Carolina.
Yes, that's very true. And then I think prior to the removal in 1838, there were probably still quite a few Cherokees in the mountains of South Carolina. And eventually after 1838, they were all very well taken away very quickly. And I don't think many of them have returned back into this area. But this was a part of, that South Carolina was a part of the 57,000 square miles that the Cherokees possessed. And there is a great deal of history in the state of South Carolina. For example, I think it was probably in the 1700s when a group of chiefs went down to Charleston suing for peace. And those chiefs never returned. And that's one of the dark sides of the history of South Carolina, that peace was never achieved because of that.
Yes. Well, I want to touch base on the removal as it happened in North Carolina because, as I understand it, your family became part of the nucleus of what became the Eastern Band later on. Can you tell me about that?
I can tell you a lot about that because my family was rounded up in 1838 at Hanging Dog place in Cherokee County of today, near Murphy, North Carolina. They were marched out of Murphy over into Tennessee to a concentration type of camp there, and Fort Cass it was called, and my grandfather was robbed of $70 worth of silver by the soldiers. They marched him on from there to Nashville, Tennessee, and they spent the night in Nashville. Traveled on from there up into Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and by this time the winter was very, very harsh. And so they put them under this mantle at Hopkinsville. And so just to show how strong women really are, my great-great-grandmother decided that she had had enough. So she tucked her babies under her arms and she told her husband, "We are going home." So they walked out into a blinding snowstorm. And I think one of the babies survived the trek back, but the other one was lost. And so they made it back to Cherokee County, and they ran the settlers out of their house that had already taken over. And so they reclaimed their place there. And then later on, my great-great-grandfather, John Owle, turned around and he sued the United States government in 1840 for all the things that they had lost. Of course, he lost the case, but this was under his attorney, Will Thomas. And it just makes me very proud to realize that they really did try to fight back and stand up for what was right.
That's fantastic. And so today you still live in Cherokee, North Carolina.
Yes.
And you do quite a bit of work translating your culture to others. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I taught school for about 14 years, and this was on the reservation. All of my students were Cherokees until 1990, and at that point in time I decided that I felt like I needed to travel even further than just my own classroom, and so I stopped teaching in my classroom and started traveling the whole eastern United States, telling stories to children who may not necessarily ever have contact with a person who has lived on the reservation, is Cherokee, and has gone through the whole gamut of Indian schools and this type of thing. I think it's very important for them to hear the real history, the true history of what really happened there.
Can you tell me about some of the struggles that you have encountered yourself, the tribe has encountered in trying to continue the culture in modern times?
You know, we were assimilated back in the 1700s, and assimilated very well, because by the time of the removal, the 15,000 Cherokees on the Trail of Tears, 90% of the adults could read and write thanks to Sequoyah, but 90% of the soldiers who removed them could neither read nor write. So we were, I think, even more assimilated into society than the settlers themselves were a lot of times in Georgia and South Carolina, these regions. And this is one of the things that sort of killed the culture of the Cherokee. It was also attacked again when General Pratt had captured some of Geronimo's troops and put them into prison. He dressed them in military uniforms and he marched them a half a day and worked them a half a day, and then observed that maybe they were turning into Caucasians. And so they opened up boarding schools all across the United States, and took little children, let's say 5 years of age. Can you imagine taking your child from you when it's 5 and cutting its hair and taking away anything that was tribal and beating the child if it spoke its own language? And so this was another attack upon the culture itself. And nowadays on the reservation, it's more of just having to fit into what culture and society is today. So televisions have come and have changed a great deal. Of course, the casino is there now, and things are changing very, very quickly. And we're trying to create a pull to be interested in the culture rather than going to the outside society culture. But it's not an easy thing. It takes a great deal of time and effort to even try to preserve the language.
Mm-hmm. And are there particular aspects of Cherokee culture that you think are sort of the quintessential things to be conserved in the tribe?
You know, I think that when the settlers first came here so many years ago, that they met a people who had lived on this land for 10,000 years. And when they saw the land, it was a place where the water was crystal clear and you could drink out of almost any stream. They saw a place where the trees were so large it would take 7 people with their arms outstretched to reach around each tree. They saw a land filled with animals and the streams were filled with fish. And it was a beautiful place, and there were no code orange days in that time where children could not go outside to play. But I think one of the most important things is to remember that the Native American people have and will continue to try to preserve the earth by respecting it and keeping it clean and trying to recycle and do everything they can to keep this place that we live in a very wonderful place for 7 generations of children to come. We sometimes think only of ourselves, but how about your children and your grandchildren? Can they see a tree? Can they go out and swim in one of the lakes? Can they go fishing like you did? And can they breathe the air? Or will they be in some sort of a bubble just trying to exist? So we must be very careful in what we do. And I think the younger generation has a better concept of what should be done than we did as young people growing up.
And it strikes me that there are people on the boundary who really specialize in Cherokee culture because it's so embedded and they've lived a great deal of time and have a great deal of experience. And those people are generally known as elders. Is that correct?
That is true. And most of the time when I was growing up, those elders were just sort of pushed aside. They were working in textile factories. They were shunned and made fun of when they spoke of the dances and the language and the culture. And people were convincing them that that was a bad thing. But in about the 1970s, things began to change. And the tribe began to get monies that they could use for the cultural preservation. And they began to go out into communities and bring these elders in and began to ask them, what do you remember? What can you tell us? What can we preserve and what can we bring back? And so from that point on, I think it's probably been a very good thing to be a Native American in that area. And one day, the Cherokees will preserve a great deal, much more of what is still there in hiding in some place.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I thank you for the opportunity. And in Cherokee would say, Shkin, Data Dagahoyum. Thank you. See you again.